Teysa Karlov is one of the new legendary creatures from the new set, Ravnica Allegiance. We're going to show you how to build this deck with a $100 budget, and then at the end of the video, stay tuned, we'll show you a couple upgrades you can make with no budget considerations in mind. So let's get down to what Teysa Karlov does. So Teysa Karlov is 2, a white and a black for a 2/4 legendary creature human advisor, and it has a pretty special ability on it, which is basically a panharmonicon for death triggers, which reads, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Now she also has a second ability which says, creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. So as you'll see as we start to build this deck, there is a token sub-theme in mind which also plays into her first ability where she doubles your death triggers as well. Our deck strategy is that we're going to play an aristocrat style deck where we're sacrificing our creatures and sending them to the graveyard. We're going to double down on death triggers and we're going to generate tokens off of those death triggers and then drain our opponents. There are a couple of infinite combos in the deck which we'll go over later on, and then we do also have an alternate win con with a couple of cards in the deck. Let's talk about some of the sacrifice outlets in the deck. So we have Carrion Feeder, sack a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder. Yahenni Undying Partisan, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on him and sacrifice another creature. Yahenni gains indestructible until end of turn. And then we have Viscera Seer, sack a creature, scry 1. The main reason these are in the deck is to provide a sack outlet for some of our creatures to gain additional value, and also to drain your opponents when we have a Zulaport Cutthroat or Blood Artist on the battlefield. So the next two cards are also sack outlets, but they do provide a little bit more value than the other ones that we just talked about. So Ashnod's Altar is an artifact and it says sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. So you can use this to ramp up if you have like a token that you want to get rid of, and then you can also drain your opponents if you have the Zulaport Cutthroat or their Blood Artist out and double up on those triggers as well. Then you have Krav the Unredeemed, and it says, pay a black, sack X creatures, target player draws X cards and gains X life, put X +1/+1 counters on Krav the Unredeemed. This is just really strong. You can sack all your little tokens or some of your other creatures on the battlefield to gain value, and this is instant speed. So like to a board wipe, you can sack all your stuff to Krav, and then you can draw a bunch of cards and gain a bunch of life. We included 3 creatures in this deck that have the ability when they enter the battlefield, each player sacrifices the creature. So not only is this strong if you have an opponent that doesn't have very many creatures in their deck, or maybe they're only playing their commander as their only creature. We'll use like Mizzix, for example, or a Narset. You're able to play this and then they have to sacrifice their creature, where sometimes you may not be able to fight that commander because Narset, for example, has hexproof. And then also if you don't have a sack outlet out, you can play this creature to sack one of your value creatures. So for example, you could sacrifice Hallowed Spirit Keeper to get a bunch of tokens if you don't have a sack outlet to get rid of it. Let's talk about a few ways we're able to abuse Teysa's first ability of doubling death triggers. So the first card we have is Vindictive Lich, and this says when it dies, choose one or more, and then each one of these modes must choose a different player. So target opponent sacks a creature, target opponent discards 2 cards, and target opponent loses 5 life. Then we have Corpse Augur, which says when it dies, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creature cards in target player's graveyard. This card's strong because you're going to have a lot of cards in your graveyard anyway, because we are playing an aristocrat style. And then Skull Clamp, which is one of the most powerful cards in this entire deck, says whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, but with Teysa out, it's draw 4. And we do have a lot of tokens that we're able to sack to this as well. Then we have Hallowed Spirit Keeper. When Hallowed Spirit Keeper dies, put X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Then we have Pawn of Ulamog. Whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create an 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature with the ability to sack it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. And then we have Sifter of Skulls. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sack this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. So Pawn of Ulamog and Sifter of Skulls are really great ways to ramp early on in the game when your creatures are dying, and they do double with Teysa. Then we have Boreas Charger. When Boreas Charger leaves the battlefield, choose an opponent who controls more lands than you. Search your library for a number of plains cards equal to the difference and reveal them. Put 1 onto the battlefield, tap, and the rest into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then we have Butcher of Malakir. Whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So it's a budget Grave Pact or Dictate of Erebos on a stick. And then we have Archon of Justice. When it dies, exile target permanent. Just a really great removal spell that will double if you have your Teysa out. Let's talk about a few cards that are really the engine of this deck. So we have Smothering Abomination. information that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, sack a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So this is really good with Teysa because you will be sacrificing a lot of creatures, and every time you do, you'll draw a card. Then you have Harvester of Souls. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. And then Midnight Reaper is very similar and says, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. Very important on this card is it does make you draw the card, so it's not a May ability, so you have to be careful if you're doing an infinite combo and this is on the battlefield. You could deck yourself. Then we have Grim Haruspex that says, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. And Dark Prophecy, whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Again, these are not May abilities, so you do have to draw the cards, so you have to be careful if you're trying to combo out. There are several cards in this deck that create tokens when creatures die. So Field of Souls is an enchantment that whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you're going to make a 1/1 spirit token with flying. Then we have Ogre Slumlord. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may put a 1/1 black rat creature token onto the battlefield. Rats also have Death Touch. Then there's Open the Graves, which is an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. These will all work with Teysa's ability. Whenever a creature dies, you're going to double this trigger. So with Open the Graves, you'll get 2 black zombie creature tokens. Then we have Requiem Angel, that whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, you're going to put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And we have Twilight Drover. Whenever a creature token leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and pay 2 and a white, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. And then we have Ancient Stone Idol, which has Flash. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature and Trample, and whenever it dies, create a 6/12 colorless construct artifact creature token with Trample. So doubling down on Teysa's Death Trigger ability with Ancient Stone Idol gives you 18 power on the board. These creatures are essential to the way this deck works and are combo enablers in the deck. So we have Vindictive Vampire. Whenever another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. Zulaport Cutthroat says, whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then Blood Artist is, whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. These will all trigger Teysa's second ability, so these will all double up when a creature dies, and these are really strong with your sacrifice outlets in the deck. We included a couple of infinite combos in the deck. They do take a little bit of setup. With a Zulaport Cutthroat out and a sack outlet, if you have a Revelark and a Karmic Guide, you can go infinite. And the way it works is you would evoke your Revelark, which means when you cast this spell, you're going to sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. So your Revelark would go to the graveyard. And if you have any creatures in there, it would trigger Revelark to return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then you're going to play your Karmic Guide, returning Revelark back to the battlefield. And then you're going to sack your Karmic Guide to Viscera Seer, and then sack your Revelark to Viscera Seer. And when Revelark hits the graveyard again, you're going to return the Karmic Guide back to the battlefield. It's going to trigger and return the Revelark back to the battlefield. And this is just going to be an infinite loop. But you do have to have the Zulaport Cutthroat out. Otherwise, you're just looping and nothing's happening. So you would have the Zulaport Cutthroat out, and it's going to drain all your opponents for 1 life, and then you'll win the game that way. The second combo we include in this deck is an interaction between Sun Titan and Gift of Immortality. So Sun Titan says, when it enters the battlefield, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then Gift of Immortality is a 3 mana cost enchantment aura that says, when enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Return Gift of Immortality to the battlefield, attached to that creature at the beginning of the next end step. So when your Sun Titan dies, your Gift of Immortality is going to trigger to return the Sun Titan back to the battlefield. And then with the Sun Titan trigger on the stack, you're going to return the Gift of Immortality back and attach it to your Sun Titan. And then you're just going to keep sacking the Sun Titan to Viscera Seer and repeating that loop. And then you have to have the Zulaport Cutthroat on the battlefield again. It's going to just drain all your opponents out and you'll win the game that way. So let's talk about our alternate win con in this deck, and it does revolve around creating treasure tokens. So we have Pitiless Plunderer in the deck, and it says whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token, and the treasures have tap it, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And with Teysa on the battlefield, this is going to trigger twice, so you'll get 2 artifacts for every creature that you control dies. In an Aristocrat deck, you're going to be sacking a lot of your creatures, so you're going to get a lot of treasure, which is going to help you ramp into some of your more expensive spells. One of those spells is Revel in Riches, which is an enchantment that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure token. This will trigger twice off of Teysa as well. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. So if this sticks around and you have 10 treasures on the battlefield, you're just going to straight up win. Game over. It's a really powerful card. I wanted to take a few moments to talk about some of the non-budget upgrades that you can make to this deck. So if you start out with a $100 shell, later on down the road as you get more money or you make some trades, you can upgrade a few of the pieces in this deck to some of the really strong, powerful cards that work with Teysa really well. So first we have Aetherios, God of Passage, and it's a legendary enchantment creature god that's indestructible, and unless your devotion to white and black is more than 7, it isn't a creature. So this is good because your opponents aren't able to interact with enchantments as well as they are with creatures, so this usually will stick around for most of the game. And it has whenever another creature you own dies, return it to your hand unless target opponent pays 3 life. So this will double up with Teysa, so they'll have to pay 6 life or let you return a creature to your hand, and there's a lot of creatures that we want to return to our hand. Then we have Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos. They both have the same effect. Whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacks a creature. Again, this will trigger twice off of Teysa. Right now, I would probably go with the Dictate of Erebos because it has flash and it's a little bit cheaper. This card has gone up a lot over the last year and a half, but they'll continue going up until they get reprinted, so it's not a bad time to buy them. Then we have Massacre Worm, which is just a house in this deck. So when Massacre Worm enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn, so it is like a one-sided board wipe for smaller creatures. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, that player loses 2 life. This does double off of Teysa. Next up we have Elenda the Dusk Rose. 2 white and a black for a legendary creature vampire knight. It's a 1/1. It has lifelink, and it has whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda the Dusk Rose. When Elenda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power. So this is going to get big quickly with all the sacrifice we're going to be doing in the deck, and then when it does die with a Teysa on the battlefield, you're going to double up on those vampire tokens. And then we have Phyrexian Altar, 3 mana artifact that says sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is another great sack outlet in the deck, similar to Ashnod's Altar, but it does produce colored mana instead of colorless mana. This did just come down in price quite a bit, so now's a really good time to pick these up. Then we have Hangerback Walker, XX for an artifact creature construct, 0/0. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on it, and you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. This is another way to flood the board with tokens, which work really well with Teysa. Then we have Anointed Procession, 3 and a white for an enchantment that says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of these tokens instead. This is going to double up on all the tokens that you're making that you'll see with the sub-theme in the deck. This is really powerful and typically an ability that we don't have in white. Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you found it helpful, please take a second to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It definitely helps support the show and helps us keep producing content. We definitely appreciate the support, and we'll see you next time.